In a crowded city intersection, a blind black woman faces public humiliation when a white cop violently snaps her cane. Onlookers freeze, unsure whether to help or walk away, but the quiet resolve in her stance signals that this won't end how anyone expects. We have rules on this block. You people don't just get to walk wherever you want. Now move, or I'll move you myself. The voice sliced through the morning noise like a blade. Sharp, loud, laced with disdain. It came from Officer Cooper, standing tall with his sunglasses low and baton drawn, right at the edge of 54th and Grantham, a buzzing downtown crosswalk. In a gentrified neighborhood of high-rises and polished cafes, the street was alive with movement. Joggers, dog walkers, a pair of students sipping iced coffee, a middle-aged man unloading boxes from a delivery truck. But now, every head turns, every footstep paused. A bubble of discomfort expanded in the air. At the center of it all stood a woman, late 60s, neatly dressed, a navy blue headscarf wrapped with quiet elegance, her back straight, her chin slightly raised. She was holding a white cane, one that now hung barely in her grasp, a sign of both vulnerability and defiance. Her name was Eleanor, and she was blind. I said, "Move," Cooper barked again, taking a step forward. She didn't flinch, her lips didn't part, but she tilted her head slightly, as if catching the direction of the officer's words by sound alone. The tapping of her cane, which had guided her for years, paused mid-air. The cop sneered. "Don't play dumb. You heard me." Then, with emotion as cruel as it was deliberate, he yanked the cane from her hand and snapped it over his knee. The crack echoed louder than any siren. Gasps filled the street. The joggers stopped running. The students dropped their coffee. The delivery man froze mid-lift. One child clutched their mother's coat. No one stepped forward. Not yet. Eleanor's hands hung in the air, trembling slightly as if still feeling the shape of the cane that no longer existed. Cooper threw the broken halves on the pavement like garbage. She slowly lowered her hands, then reached into the pocket of her coat. From it she retrieved a slim leather card case, calmly, quietly. Her fingers knew exactly what to do. She flipped it open, tilted it slightly upward, not for her to see, but for the world. "Officer," she said, her voice soft but clear. "You might want to call your captain," Cooper laughed. "Why? You're going to tell him a blind old lady wouldn't follow orders?" She turned her head slightly. "No, I'm going to tell him why his badge number's about to make national news." He frowned, taking a half-step closer. "Lady, don't push your luck." Eleanor smiled. "You just snapped the cane of a federal judge's mother." Silence dropped like a hammer. Her next words came slowly. "Lethal. And her son hates the word ape even more than I do." A ripple of murmurs spread through the crowd. Cooper took a half-step back, blinking as the weight of her words sank in. His confidence cracked for the first time. Eleanor tilted her chin up again, serene and unbothered. They thought she was just another blind woman. She reached down, picked up the broken cane herself. She raised the man who writes the laws. The shattered cane pieces still lay on the concrete like bones. And the silence that followed Eleanor's final words wasn't just quiet. It was heavy, stifling, the kind that doesn't just fill the air, it chokes it. Someone across the street whispered, "Did she say federal judge?" Another voice, "He's screwed." Phones rose like a wall of tiny eyes. Recordings were already live. Streams had begun on social media. Every angle caught. The shout, the snap, the silence. Officer Cooper was suddenly too aware of his own hands. They itched. Sweat crept beneath. His collar, his smirk had vanished, replaced by a twitch in his jaw. He looked down at Eleanor, then at the growing circle of onlookers. I didn't know," he started. But she wasn't listening. She didn't need to. Her hand found the broken cane by memory alone. She bent slightly, picked up both pieces with slow dignity, then turned her head slightly to the left. "I can walk," she said to no one in particular. "But I won't walk alone today." And she didn't. From the side of the street, a young black man in a tailored charcoal grey suit stepped forward. Late 20s, maybe early 30s. Clean cut, sharp, composed, no badge, no words. "Just presence." He offered Eleanor his arm. Cooper flinched at the sight of him. He didn't recognize the face, but something about the posture, the confidence, the way he moved like he wasn't walking on concrete but through a courtroom, made his stomach turn. The man didn't look at the officer, not once. His attention was fully on Eleanor. "Mom," he said softly. Eleanor accepted the gesture, looping her arm through his. With the broken cane in her other hand, she walked, with him, slowly, powerfully, across the street and down the sidewalk. Each step felt like a verdict. Behind them, murmurs rose. Phones kept recording, but no one dared block their path. Cooper watched them disappear into the blur of traffic and city noise. For the first time in a long while, he didn't feel like the enforcer of the law. He felt like a man caught in a trap he had built himself. He pulled out his radio, tried to keep his voice even. "Dispatch. I need to speak with—" He stopped because one of the students, the same one who dropped their coffee, was now live streaming with his face centered in the frame. "Yeah, this guy right here," the student was saying to the camera. "Snapped a blind lady's cane. Turns out she's the mom of a federal judge. This is about to go viral." Cooper turned, tried to wave the kid off. "Turn that off. That's not legal. Neither is assault," the kid replied without missing a beat. "Smile for the internet. Officer Cooper." The cop's shoulders stiffened. Meanwhile, a few blocks away, Eleanor and the suited man entered a small, ivy-lined apartment complex. The doorman didn't even need to ask. He opened the door instantly. Inside the elevator, Eleanor turned her face toward her companion. "Thank you, Darren," he nodded. "I was nearby, heard the scanner. Figured I'd beat the headlines." She exhaled slowly. "It's been a long time since I felt that level of humiliation." "Not for long," he said. They reached the 3rd floor. He led her to her door, unlocked it and stepped aside. "Are you okay alone?" She nodded. "I've always been okay. But tomorrow, I think you'll need to be loud." Darren's expression changed. The calmness in his eyes hardened into something colder. Controlled rage, not loud like shouting, loud like consequence, already drafting the response. Eleanor smiled faintly. "He thinks it's just a PR mess." Darren's jaw flexed. "He'll learn it's much, much more." She stepped inside her apartment, the light warm and welcoming. But just before closing the door, she paused. "He called me you people, right before the snap." Darren didn't reply. He didn't need to. His silence was already thundering. The door shut, and down the hall, he pulled out his phone, typed a message, and hit send. "Initiate code Gray. Officer Cooper, 54th and Grantham. Begin investigation into prior complaints. Assemble legal team. No mercy." The system had failed quietly for too long, but this time it had picked the wrong mother. Officer Cooper sat in his patrol car, the broken cane still fresh in his mind. His hands gripped the steering wheel so tight his knuckles turned white. His radio buzzed with casual chatter, but none of it reached him. He was too busy staring at the swirling storm unfolding on his phone screen. Over $200,000 views. A single clip. His voice was yelling, the snap, her calm words. He was refreshed again. 290,000. The comments were worse. Did he seriously just snap a blind woman's cane? She's the mother of WHO? Qualified immunity better run. Fast! His phone vibrated with a call. Private number, he answered. Hello? This is Captain Monroe. I'm going to need you to come down to the precinct now. Cooper opened his mouth, but nothing came out. The call ended before he could speak. He cursed under his breath and started the engine. Sirens off. Quiet. For the first time in years, he was driving without swagger, without control. Across the city, in a towering granite courthouse, Darren stood in front of a large window overlooking downtown. His black robe hung from a wooden peg behind him, but he wasn't wearing it yet. He was still in his suit. Calm, collected, wrath restrained beneath perfect posture. A young clerk walked in. "Judge Williams, the governor's office is asking if you'll comment." Darren didn't look away from the window. "No, they want to know if the rumors are true." "They're not rumors," he replied. "They're facts, and soon there'll be charges." "They're not rumors," he replied. "They're facts, and soon there'll be charges." The clerk nodded slowly, then hesitated. "Sir, this might sound out of place, but are you okay?" Darren turned to him for the first time. "I'm not the one who got hurt," he said, "but I am the one who will make sure that pain is remembered." The clerk quietly left. Behind the thick walls of his chambers, Darren reached into the drawer and pulled out an old envelope, faded, worn. Inside, a photo. His mother, younger, standing with her first guide dog, smiling in front of the very courthouse he now presided over. She had been denied a loan 3 times that year. He'd never forgotten. His phone buzzed again. This time it was his assistant, pulling all prior records on Officer Cooper. "Internal Affairs has 4 complaints, 2 marked unresolved." Darren replied instantly. "Reopen them, interview every witness. I want patterns, I want bias, I want blood on paperwork." At that same moment in the precinct, Cooper walked into Captain Monroe's office. The air was thick, files open. Screens loaded with comments, videos, news tickers. Monroe looked up, stone-faced. "You understand the situation?" Cooper scoffed. "It's just a misunderstanding." Monroe slammed a folder shut. "You snapped the cane of a blind woman, in uniform, in broad daylight. And she's the mother of Darren Williams." The name finally landed. Cooper blinked. "Wait, Darren Williams." Monroe nodded grimly. "Federal judge? Civil rights litigation, Harvard Law, youngest appointee to the federal bench in 50 years. And in case you missed it, his mother's incident is on every screen in the country right now." Cooper sat down, face pale. "I didn't know." "You didn't care," Monroe cut in. "And now you've lit a fire under a man who built his career burning down systems like the one you just represented." "I didn't mean—" "You did," Monroe said coldly. "And now it's about to cost you everything." Back at Eleanor's apartment, the phone didn't stop ringing. Friends, reporters, politicians, but she answered none. She sat quietly at the window, a new cane resting beside her. Not broken, not yet used. There was a knock at the door. She stood, slowly, and opened it. A woman in her 30s stood there dressed plainly, but with eyes that had seen too much. "Miss Eleanor?" "Yes?" "I'm Carla. My brother was stopped by that same officer last year. It got physical." Eleanor said nothing, just stepped aside and motioned her in. "You're not the only one," Carla said. "There's more, a lot more." Eleanor nodded gently. "Then let's not waste this moment." She picked up the new cane. "This time, we won't walk away quietly." The living room smelled faintly of chamomile and old books. Eleanor's couch, worn at the edges but soft as memory, hosted more truth that evening than any courtroom had. In years. Carla sat beside her, hands folded tightly in her lap. Across from them, 2 others had arrived. One man in his 40s, ex-military, walked with a limp. The other, barely 23, still had the haunted look of someone whose bruises hadn't fully faded. They had stories. Each began cautiously, haltingly. The language of pain often stutters before it speaks, but Eleanor listened with the patience. "Of 1,000 unseen scars," Carla spoke first. "He dragged my brother from the car. No reason, just said he looked wrong." The young man followed. "He pushed me down near the park. Said I looked like I was casing houses. I was walking home from my shift. The veteran's voice came last, low. He knocked out 2 of my teeth. I didn't press charges. Figured it wasn't worth it. Eleanor leaned forward. It's worth it now. They looked at her. Because people are watching, Carla asked. No, Eleanor replied, because now he's the one scared. Meanwhile, in his apartment, Cooper sat on the edge of his bed, the floor littered with open drawers and scattered uniform pieces. He hadn't shaved, hadn't slept. His badge sat face down on the nightstand. The doorbell rang. He jumped a beat, then another. He stood, walked slowly to the door and peeked through the peephole. 2 men in dark suits. Internal affairs. He opened the door without speaking. Officer Cooper? One asked, already knowing the answer. Cooper nodded. We'll be asking you a few questions regarding past complaints and the recent incident involving Ms. Eleanor Williams. Cooper opened his mouth, but paused. Everything he said could now be a nail in his own coffin. Can I have my lawyer present? The man on the right gave a tight smile. Absolutely, but that won't stop the audit. They stepped inside without waiting. Back in the city's legal district, Darren sat in a private conference room, 6 lawyers seated around him, laptops glowing. I want full case reviews of every charge Officer Cooper filed in the last 6 years, especially any dismissed due to lack of evidence. One attorney, a sharp-eyed woman with braids and a reputation for winning federal appeals, asked, "What are we aiming for here? Suspension? A settlement?" Darren looked at her, calm, deadly. "We're not aiming," he said. "We're dismantling. Brick by brick, system by system," she nodded. "Then we'll start with patterns. Racism hides in repetition." Another lawyer added, "We can cross-reference arrest reports with demographic breakdowns, time of stops, reason for suspicion." "Do it," Darren said, "and flag every anomaly." He stood and walked to the large whiteboard in the back of the room. On it he wrote 2 words in thick red marker, Public Reckoning 1. Of the younger interns who hadn't spoken all day, finally cleared his throat. "Sir, I used to live on the 54th. Cooper stopped me once, said I fit a description. I didn't even have facial hair back then." Darren turned to him. "You're going to write your affidavit tonight." The intern nodded. At Eleanor's apartment, the meeting ended with quiet resolve. No one cried. No one raged. They simply exchanged numbers, promised to stay in touch, to speak out. Before they left, Eleanor handed each of them a small card with her address and her son's office line. "Next time you're afraid," she said gently, "call someone who doesn't fear the badge." As the door closed behind the last guest, Eleanor returned to her seat, the weight of the world pressing gently against her shoulders. Not crushing, not any more, just enough to remind her why she was still standing. She looked out the window, where city lights blinked like judgment. "They buried our pain in silence for years," she whispered to herself. Then she smiled. "Let's make noise." Detective Andrea Mills adjusted her glasses and flipped through the stack of files on the conference table. Each folder carried a complaint. Some were labeled insufficient evidence. Others bore the infamous rubber stamp. No further action. But patterns whispered between the lines. Same officer, same neighborhoods, same demographics. Cooper. She clicked her pen and made a small note. Incident 17. Chokehold on minor. Dismissed. Witness not contacted. Across from her, a forensic analyst traced timestamps across bodycam footage from Cooper's patrol car. Several files were missing during key moments. A few had suspicious audio cuts. One had been overwritten. "Someone tried to bury this," he muttered. Andrea didn't blink. "Let's dig it back up." Elsewhere in the city, news anchors were dissecting Eleanor's incident like it was a breaking war report. Blind woman's cane, snapped by officer. Son is federal judge. Who is Judge Darren Williams? Meet the man behind the legal earthquake. Silent power, how a mother's dignity sparked a movement. Eleanor didn't speak to any of them. Not yet. She sat quietly in her kitchen, listening to the radio instead. The voice of a black journalist filled the space, steady and clear. We've seen abuse before, but there's something different about this moment. The look on that woman's face after her cane was broken. She wasn't broken, she was watching, and now the whole country's watching too. She turned the radio off, stood, and walked to the window. Below, a small crowd had gathered on the street. Not angry, not chanting, just standing, holding signs that read, "We see you, Eleanor, and justice has eyes." Upstairs, Darren stood before a camera in a private press room. He adjusted his suit, tightened his tie, and gave the nod. The live stream began. "My name is Judge Darren Williams," he said. "And what happened to my mother was not new, it was not rare, it was not an exception, it was a pattern, and it's time we treat it like one." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. We will not settle for apologies. We will not accept suspension. We want accountability, systemic, public, permanent. Across thousands of screens, people leaned in. Teachers, mothers, lawyers, kids, police officers. Some cheered, some raged, some simply watched with their breath held. Back in his apartment, Cooper sat in darkness, a single lamp buzzing overhead. His phone buzzed. Unknown number. He let it ring, then answered. A voice, low and worn, came through. "Cooper, it's Willis." He sat up straight. "Chief Willis?" "Not anymore. Retired last year. Listen, they're coming for you." Cooper swallowed. "I didn't mean for it to go this far." "You think that matters?" the old voice rasped. "You messed with the wrong family, and the system don't back idiots. It eats them when it's hungry." Cooper's throat tightened. "What should I do?" There was a pause. Then, "You got dirt? Use it. Or get buried." The line went dead. Back in the Internal Affairs office, Andrea looked up at her screen. She clicked open a file labeled D. Williams Litigation History. Civil rights, police misconduct, unlawful force, pattern-based lawsuits. Then her eyes widened. She turned to the analyst. "He doesn't just want justice. He's building a case against the entire department." That night, Eleanor sat in bed, the broken cane lying across her lap like a relic of war. Her fingers traced its splintered edge. Then she picked up a notepad and began writing names. Not lawyers, not reporters, people, neighbors, teachers, former detainees, parents, sons. Because justice didn't start in courtrooms, it started in living rooms. And the next time they knocked on her door, she would have a list. The pages filled slowly at first. Names, written in Eleanor's careful, deliberate handwriting. Each name belonged to someone with a story. People who once whispered their pain in safe corners or buried it completely. But now the silence had cracked. And light was pouring in. Carla brought two more neighbors. The young intern from Darren's office shared the incident with his older cousin, who had a scar and a sealed juvenile record, courtesy of Cooper. The mailman, Mr. Jenkins, said he'd been stopped 6 times in 5 months for matching a vague description. Eleanor listened to them all, offering only a soft nod and the pen. She didn't push, didn't prod, just wrote the names, and the list grew. In Darren's chambers, things were less quiet. Legal pads, laptops, coffee cups, phones buzzing non-stop. A whiteboard across the wall now mapped the entire precinct's history like a crime web. Red thread ran from Officer Cooper to 7 unresolved complaints, 2 internal memos, and 1 deleted body cam file. "We've got enough," one lawyer said. "We can go to court." Darren shook his head. "Not yet." Another lawyer frowned. "Why not? This is more than enough to sink him." "I'm not just sinking Cooper," Darren said. "I'm exposing the rot." He pointed to the memo in the top corner, A 2019 internal warning about racial profiling in the district. Ignored. If we push now, they'll isolate him. Make him the scapegoat. Say he was a bad apple. I don't want an apple. I want the orchard. At Eleanor's apartment, a courier knocked. She answered, expecting another gift basket or media request. But it was a letter. No return address. She opened it slowly, unfolding crisp white paper. There were only 2 lines. They can ruin your son's career too. Stay quiet or he won't have one. She read it twice. Then again, her hand trembled slightly. She folded it carefully, walked over to the cabinet and pulled out an old tin box. Inside it were relics, her late husband's watch, a faded photo of Darren as a child, a bronze pin from the school where she once taught literature. She placed the letter inside, then locked the box. When Darren visited later that night, she didn't mention it. Not yet. "Ma," he said gently. "They're getting desperate." She nodded. "That means they're afraid." He smiled faintly. "I learned that from you." She placed a hand on his cheek. "Don't let them bait you. Rage is their weapon." "I'm not raging," he said. "I'm building." Down in his apartment, Cooper stared at his door, like it might attack him. He hadn't left in 48 hours. His fridge was empty, his curtains drawn. He'd blocked 3 reporters, 2 numbers from Internal Affairs, and 1 old friend who used the word karma too casually. He clutched a beer can in one hand, shaking slightly. The news had stopped naming him. They'd moved on to stories about Eleanor's quiet resistance and Darren's rising popularity, but that somehow made it worse. They weren't just angry. They were ignoring him now, like he was already gone. In his haze, he called someone, a number labeled Gentry Union Rep. When the man answered, Cooper said, "You still got that favor?" There was a pause. "Depends. You still got leverage?" Cooper glanced toward his closet. Inside it, under a loose floorboard, was a flash drive. It held something. He didn't know if it would save him, but it could burn someone bigger. "I might," he whispered. Gentry replied, "Then use it before someone else does." The call ended, and the silence returned. Back at Eleanor's, she sat by the window again, her list beside her. 47 names now. She placed her hand over the page and closed her eyes. Each name was a matchstick, and together they could start a fire. By Thursday morning, the city wasn't just watching, it was boiling. A leaked memo hit the newswire, an internal complaint filed by a black officer 3 years ago, warning about Cooper's racial profiling. It had been dismissed with a single sentence. "Officer, Cooper maintains high productivity." The leak didn't name the source, but the reporters all pointed their cameras toward Darren. Outside the courthouse, banners unfurled like wings. "Justice isn't blind, it's ignored. Eleanor deserved better." "Our mothers are watching." Inside the judge's chambers, Darren stood beside his senior advisor. "We've confirmed it. Someone in Internal Affairs is feeding intel to the press." Darren didn't flinch. "Let them. It'll keep the public loud." That same afternoon, a mass email was sent from Darren's legal team to local journalists. It contained de-identified case summaries, unjustified arrests, body cam discrepancies, witness intimidation, no direct accusations, just data. Truth in patterns, and the patterns screamed. Meanwhile, Cooper was unraveling. His phone battery stayed dead, his TV on mute. He paced like a caged animal. His reflection in the mirror had stubble and red-rimmed eyes. In a moment of desperation, he pulled the flash drive from beneath the floorboard. He connected it to his laptop. Inside, one file. A corrupted body cam video from 2 years ago. It showed him confronting a teenager, shouting. The audio skipped, the footage glitched. It didn't show the takedown, but it ended with his voice saying, "Stop resisting. I said stop resisting." He uploaded it anonymously. Within an hour, it was on every screen. But instead of vindicating him, it fueled the fire. Comments poured in. You can hear the fear in the kid's voice. Why is this even saved? Who was hiding this? This is what he chose to leak? A trending hashtag emerged. It's justice. For the silenced, Cooper sank into his couch. He realized too late. He had only reminded the world how cruel he sounded. That evening, a candlelight vigil gathered outside Eleanor's apartment complex. People stood in rows, holding small flames in the wind. Old, young, black, brown, white, side by side. No shouting, no chanting, just standing. One by one, small speakers stepped forward. Carla spoke about her brother. A teacher spoke about the fear of calling 911 when your skin matched a stereotype. A retired judge thanked Eleanor for her silent revolution. Then someone offered her the mic. Eleanor didn't want it, but she took it. She stood before them, the night chill brushing against her face, and spoke into the quiet. I've spent most of my life being told what I couldn't do. She paused. I couldn't walk home without someone questioning where I came from. I couldn't raise a son in peace without hearing warnings. I couldn't hold a cane without it being broken. She looked out into the sea of candles, but I raised that son anyway, and he became a judge. Soft murmurs. And now they're afraid I'll speak too loudly, but the truth is, they're not afraid of me. She let the silence stretch. They're afraid of you, of us. Because when people stop whispering and start naming things out loud, the systems start shaking. One candle went out, then another relit it. Eleanor smiled. They didn't break me when they broke that cane. She held up the two splintered pieces, now taped together. They reminded me why I must never walk quietly again. The crowd erupted, not in noise, but in stillness, in breathless, tear-stained, soul-burning stillness. A movement was born in that silence, and it carried more weight than any riot ever could. At 9:15 a.m., Darren's legal team filed a 312-page petition. The first 17 pages focused on Officer Cooper. The next 295 focused on the department that protected him. It was submitted to the Civilian Oversight Committee, the State Bar, and the Attorney General's office simultaneously. Triple pressure, triple exposure. By 10:04 a.m., news anchors were holding up copies on air. Pattern, not accident. Failure to discipline. Deliberate neglect. One retired officer turned analyst put it bluntly. This isn't a lawsuit. It's a demolition notice. Inside the courthouse, Darren remained calm, as ever, but behind his composed exterior, every move was calculated. Make sure our petition highlights chain of command failures, he said to his advisor. We want accountability. To climb. Outside, reporters lined the sidewalk. Not for Darren, for Eleanor. She had become the heart of the story. The photos showed her walking with the taped cane, wearing a navy coat, a soft scarf, and a gaze that held centuries of women who had stood tall when the world tried to shrink them. She hadn't said much since the vigil. She didn't need to. Her silence had teeth now. Cooper, on the other hand, had no such luxury. He sat in a bleak government office across from a panel of 5 senior officials in dull grey suits. The door behind him clicked shut. A nameplate in the center of the table read, Disciplinary Review Board, Closed Session. A woman in the middle adjusted her glasses and spoke first. Officer Cooper, you are here under allegations of misconduct, excessive force, racial profiling, and failure to de-escalate. Cooper grunted. I did my job. Another board member looked up sharply. You did your version of the job. The law disagrees. Cooper clenched his fists. Look, he said, people are blowing this up because of who she is. If she were careful, the woman warned. Finish that sentence, and I guarantee it'll end up in tomorrow's headlines. He sat back, bitter. breathing through his teeth. One of the board members opened a file. 4 complaints, 2 uninvestigated, 1 audio wipe, and now a body cam leak meant to manipulate public perception. "It was for context," Cooper muttered. "It was evidence," the man snapped. "You tampered with it." Then came the final voice, one Cooper recognized, Captain Monroe. He sat at the far end, silent until now. But when he leaned forward, the room felt like it tilted. "I vouched for you," Monroe said quietly. "Told the brass you were tough but fair." Cooper's lip curled. "You used me, sent me into zones you didn't want rookies touching. You liked how I handled business, until someone filmed it." Monroe's stare didn't waver. "Maybe I did. And maybe that's why I'm sitting here now, because we let people like you think you were untouchable." He turned to the board. "My recommendation is immediate suspension pending investigation with full internal audit." The woman in the center nodded once. Motion carried. The gavel tapped. Cooper didn't hear the click. He heard the snap again. Back at Eleanor's apartment, Carla rushed in, nearly breathless. "They're suspending him," she said. "It's everywhere. News, Twitter, radio." Eleanor didn't flinch. She poured tea. Carla watched her in disbelief. "Aren't you going to say something? Celebrate? Smile?" Eleanor looked at her with the quiet fire of someone who had survived. "Storms. They suspended a man," she said. "I'm not done until they change the system." Carla blinked. Eleanor sipped her tea. Downstairs, the doorman changed the building's front sign. It now read, "The Eleanor Williams Residence, dedicated to dignity. No fanfare, just the truth, as it should be." The list was no longer just a list. It was an artifact. A copy had been scanned, transcribed, and displayed on a massive digital billboard downtown. Each name scrolled slowly across the screen, glowing in soft white against a deep black background. 47 stories, 47 shadows brought into the light. And at the top of the screen, bold letters read, "We are not isolated incidents." Eleanor had agreed only after Darren insisted on 3 conditions. No sensationalism, no monetization, and no altering a single name. The stories behind those names were beginning to surface. A podiatrist whose father was arrested for loitering while waiting for a cab, a bus driver who spent 2 nights in jail for resisting after asking why he was being stopped, a grandmother who still remembered being pushed face first into her own rosebush by a uniformed man 30 years ago. Eleanor read each one with her fingers curled tightly around the cane. It wasn't just about the pain anymore, it was about memory, and memory had weight. In Washington, Darren entered a silent federal briefing room. No cameras, no microphones, just thick walls, heavy doors, and people who made decisions with signatures that changed laws. He handed over a file. "This isn't just about Cooper," he said. "This is about a structure that feeds on silence." The Attorney General opened the folder. His eyebrows rose. "These are internal records. Some leaked, some subpoenaed. Some were handed to me by whistleblowers tired of choking on shame." Another official leaned forward. "What do you want from us?" Darren didn't hesitate. An independent commission, oversight, accountability, and the public acknowledgement that this system wasn't broken. It was designed this way. They didn't nod, but they didn't say no either. Back home, Cooper watched the television like it was a funeral. His own. A local news anchor was mid-broadcast, standing beside someone familiar. Officer Gerald Kane, Cooper's former partner. They'd shared cars, jokes, coffee, silence during too many traffic stops. Now Kane was sitting straight, clean-shaven, wearing his dress blues. "Did you ever see behavior from Officer Cooper that gave you pause?" the anchor asked. Kane didn't blink. "Yes." "Why didn't you report it?" "I did. In my own way. But I also let too many things slide. I failed. And I want to own that now, in front of everyone." The anchor paused. "What would you Say to Eleanor Williams? Kane looked into the camera. I'm sorry I didn't step in when I should have. You raised a son who fights with words. I stood next to a man who fought with power. Cooper's heart pounded. He turned the TV off so hard the screen cracked. In the legal district, Darren received a text. Check local 5 o'clock. Kane flipped. He played the interview on his phone. A rare smile crept across his face. We don't need to destroy the whole department, he muttered. We just need the silence to stop protecting it. Later that evening, Eleanor received a visit from a woman in her 70s, wearing a bright yellow coat and holding a single lily. I don't want to talk, the woman said. Eleanor opened the door. Then don't. They sat in silence. After a while, the woman spoke anyway. My grandson, he never said what happened, but I knew it broke him. Your name, it gave him permission to remember. Eleanor reached over, held the woman's hand. No one should need permission to heal. The woman's eyes welled. They called me bitter for still caring. Eleanor shook her head. Bitter is just grief with nowhere to go. The woman left the lily on the windowsill. Eleanor sat beside it until the sky turned silver with stars, and, for the first time in a long time, she didn't feel like she was holding the world alone. She was holding it with others. And together, it felt lighter. The envelope came at sunrise, plain, cream-colored, heavy with implication. Cooper tore it open with trembling hands. Notice of termination proceedings. Subject, Officer Jacob Cooper. The language was clinical, but the intent was lethal. He was done. He threw the letter across the room. It slapped the floor like a verdict, but it wasn't the end he feared. It was what came after. His phone hadn't buzzed in 2 days. Not from colleagues, not from friends, not from family. He was no longer the man in the uniform. He was just the face people wanted erased, and he couldn't stand it. He opened his laptop and began writing. A blog post, a manifesto. I did what I was trained to do. They're trying to cancel me for doing my job. Why should I be the scapegoat? He posted it anonymously. Within minutes, it was dissected by journalists and dismantled by lawyers. They traced the language back to him. A single comment buried in the flood summed up the public mood. You snapped the cane. Now face the consequences. At a studio downtown, Darren stood in front of a live audience. He wasn't in robes, just a charcoal suit, calm and centered. Across from him sat Councilwoman Lydia Marks, a respected moderate known for playing. Both sides, the debate had just begun. We need measured reform, she said. Not a witch hunt. Darren didn't flinch. This isn't a witch hunt, it's a mirror, and people don't like what they're seeing. A murmur ran through the crowd. Marks leaned forward. You want to punish the whole department for one man's actions? Darren's gaze was steady. I want the system that protected him for a decade to answer for that protection. That's not punishment, that's accountability. Applause broke out. It wasn't loud, but it lasted. Across town, Eleanor stood at a podium inside Hartwell University's grand lecture hall. Polished floors, velvet curtains, rows of elite students, alumni and faculty. She wasn't a professor. She didn't bring notes, but her presence filled the space like a cathedral. They invited me to speak about dignity, she said, but I'd rather speak about fear. Silence. Fear is not loud. It's not always violent. Sometimes it looks like silence, like looking away, like signing a report without reading it. Eyes shifted. Some lowered. I raised a black boy in a city where officers didn't need permission to destroy his future, so I taught him how to build one anyway. She looked toward the crowd. Now he wears a robe, and the men who ignored him all those years call him Your Honor. A ripple ran through the audience, but he shouldn't have needed to be a judge for his mother to matter. That line, raw, unpolished, cut deeper than any crafted speech. She left the stage without waiting for applause. It came anyway. Cooper saw it all from his apartment, lights off, face hollow. He turned off the TV, opened the drawer, and stared at his old badge. He pressed it against his chest like armor, but it didn't fit anymore. That night, he walked into a precinct unannounced, approached the front desk, and dropped the badge into the tray. The officer behind the glass didn't even ask his name, didn't need to. It was already written in every headline, every indictment, and every whisper that passed through the city like wind before a storm. Back at Eleanor's apartment, she added one final name to her list. Not a victim, not an ally, just a note. Jacob Cooper, the man who broke, then broke down. And beside it, she wrote something even smaller. Even falling men are part of the truth. The banners outside City Hall weren't made by professionals. They were handmade. Markers on bedsheets, cardboard cutouts, spray paint over old canvases, but their messages were loud. Listen to Eleanor. Dignity is a form of resistance. We remember every name. Inside, plans were underway for the largest civilian inquiry into police abuse in the city's history. It wasn't a trial in the legal sense, but it felt heavier, a lineup of testimony, witnesses, data analysts, historians, civil rights attorneys, and survivors. At the center of it all, Darren Williams. He'd been named the lead of the Independent Review Commission, a board granted power to investigate, subpoena, and recommend prosecution. He entered the building not as a judge today, but as a seeker of truth, and truth had many faces. At his first press conference, Darren kept it short. This commission isn't here to punish. It's here to record what others erased. That line echoed across channels. In Eleanor's living room, Carla sat beside her, scrolling through her phone. "You're trending again," she said. Eleanor smiled faintly. "Not sure I know what that means." "It means they want you to speak at the inquiry publicly." Eleanor didn't answer at first. She stared out the window where spring was beginning to break the winter's back. "What if my voice drowns?" "The others?" she finally asked. Carla looked at her. "Then raise it carefully and lift theirs with it." Later that night, Darren called. "Ma," he said, "they're going to fight this. They already are." "I know. They're using your name like a brand. Some support it. Some say you're just a symbol. Some say you're a threat." "I've been to all three before," she said. "Doesn't change who I am." He paused. "Will you testify?" Eleanor exhaled. "Yes." Across the country, survivors from her list were receiving calls. News stations, podcasts, panels, editors. Some refused, some agreed, some cried at just being asked. A college athlete named Devin shared how he was thrown against a patrol car for matching a hoodie description. A retired nurse named Letitia recounted the time Cooper arrested her for interfering with an investigation when she tried to calm a crying child on the sidewalk. Each story aired with no dramatic music. No effects, just faces and silence and words. At a downtown art gallery, a tribute opened. The Weight of Names. A space where each visitor could write the name of someone they knew was affected by profiling or abuse. The walls filled in. A single day. Eleanor attended quietly. She walked past the names. Some she recognized. Most of the time she didn't. She stopped at one that simply read, "Me," and beside it, "Still healing." She reached into her purse and took out a folded paper. She pinned it beside the name. It read, "Healing isn't quiet, let it speak." The gallery fell into a hush as visitors noticed. Back at the inquiry, Darren stood before the commission. He opened the session with no gavel, no speech, just a sentence. "This is not a hearing, it's remembering." And for the first time, in that courthouse's long history, they listened, not because they were told to, but because silence was no longer an option. The room was packed. Not just with officials and press, but with people who had no microphones, no seats and no titles, just hope in their pockets and weariness in their eyes. Eleanor stood at the center. No cane today, just the list, now bound in soft leather, cradled in her arms like scripture. The chairwoman of the commission leaned into her mic. "Ms. Williams, you may begin." Eleanor didn't read from notes. She looked straight ahead and spoke. "I didn't come here to recount pain," she began. "I came here to remind you that pain doesn't disappear just because it's not televised." Silence. I spent most of my life walking carefully, literally and metaphorically. I was told that being polite, composed and obedient would protect me. A pause. And then a man snapped my cane in half because he thought I didn't belong. Where I stood, she lifted the leather-bound list. These are the names of people who were told the same thing and who had to carry the consequences of someone else's suspicion. One commissioner looked down, ashamed. Another met her gaze. Eleanor didn't waver. They're not all victims. Some are fighters. Some are tired. Some are still healing. But all of them deserve to be heard. She placed the list gently on the table. "And this time, you will listen." It wasn't a threat, it was a prophecy. The crowd stood when she finished. Not out of courtesy, out of awe. Some cried, some clapped, some simply stood still. Eleanor bowed her head slightly and walked out without waiting. By evening, her testimony had gone viral. Again. But this time, something different happened. People in other cities began making their own lists. Names they forgot. Chicago. Silent no more. Oakland. The watch list. Atlanta. And one line from her speech appeared everywhere. Pain doesn't disappear just because it's not televised. In the mayor's office, a new police reform bill was drafted. It included mandatory bias audits, whistleblower protections, and independent civilian oversight boards. They called it the Eleanor Williams Act. The name stuck. At Darren's office, he stood before a whiteboard outlining reforms beyond legislation, cultural ones, hiring practices, education, review protocols, transparency dashboards. He knew policy alone wouldn't save the next Eleanor, but it might weaken the silence. Meanwhile, Cooper's name appeared in headlines again, not as a threat, but as a case study. The snap heard around the country. How? One officer sparked a movement. From badge to backlash, the fall of Jacob Cooper. He applied for work in 3 other cities. All declined. His name had become a warning, not for who he was, but for what the world wouldn't tolerate anymore. In her apartment, Eleanor looked at the flowers on her table. Dozens, sent from strangers, friends, even a few former students. She picked one card, handwritten and trembling. "You were my teacher. You still are." She smiled, and the next morning she returned to the school she hadn't visited in over 20 years. The hallways were quieter now. Different posters, different books, same echo of chalk on boards. The principal met her at the door. "We've cleared a space for you," she said. "Not as a teacher, as a listener." Eleanor entered the classroom. 20 chairs, one circle, and waiting inside were students ready to speak. She didn't begin with a lecture. She began with a question. "What are you afraid to say out loud?" And slowly, the room filled with truth. No list this time, just voices. And that was enough. The signing took place on a grey morning, no confetti. No orchestras, just a wooden desk on the Capitol steps, a governor with a shaking pen, and a name that now belonged to the future. The Eleanor Williams Act, enacted. Reporters stood silent as cameras clicked. The governor cleared his throat. "This law is not a solution, it is an admission that we waited too long, listened too late, and gave silence too much power." Behind him stood Darren. No robe, just his mother. He hadn't wanted her there at first. said the fight was his to carry now, but she came anyway, because it was never just his. And when the cameras turned to her, Eleanor didn't smile. She simply nodded. Firm, quiet, final. Later that day, Darren met with 2 senior aides from Washington. They offered him something most lawyers never live long enough to dream of, a nomination to the U.S. Court of Appeals, prestige, power, a career-defining legacy. He turned it down. "I don't need elevation," he said. "I need ground to stand on." Instead, he launched a new foundation, the Quiet Fire Initiative, to mentor young legal minds from underserved communities. Its motto was taken from Eleanor's testimony. "This time, you will listen." At the courthouse, something strange happened. A mural appeared overnight, painted across the entire outer wall. It showed Eleanor standing tall, her taped cane glowing gold in the sunlight, surrounded by figures young and old, hands raised, not in protest, but in presence. It wasn't sanctioned, but no one removed it. They called it the Watch. Inside the building, the courtroom where Darren once presided now bore a new plaque. Judge Darren Williams' Justice Chamber, established in honor of every name on the list. The original leather-bound list sat behind glass at the chambers. Entrance not in a museum, but where law was spoken, where it mattered. And Cooper, he disappeared, sold his apartment, closed his accounts. A neighbor said he left before dawn with a single suitcase and never returned. No charges were filed. The system chose to shame him publicly, then let him fade. Some called it mercy, others called it cowardice. Eleanor called it what it was, erasure. But she didn't chase closure, she built continuation. Back at the school, she added a new rule to her classroom. Every Friday, a student would bring a name, not famous, not known, just someone who mattered. And they would speak that name aloud, not for pity, but for presence, for remembrance. One Friday, a girl with almond skin and thick braids stood up. "My name this week is Benjamin," she said. "He was my brother. He died in police custody." They said he resisted. He didn't. The class sat still. No one interrupted. No one looked away. Eleanor nodded. "Thank you." They moved on. Not because it didn't hurt, but because that's what healing does. It moves while carrying everything with it, and in that movement, it becomes unstoppable. The years moved on, quietly, then loudly, then quietly again. The Eleanor Williams Act became the blueprint for dozens of similar laws across the country. Schools rewrote their training manuals. Departments installed civilian oversight panels. Police academies added new courses with names like implicit bias recognition and the power of listening. But change was slow, and Eleanor never pretended otherwise. She simply walked. One foot, then the next. Cane tapping rhythmically in time with a world that had finally started noticing her footsteps. Darren continued his work, not in courts, but in communities. He visited schools, prisons, training camps, town halls. He spoke less about the law now, and more about the human cost of delay. One day, a package arrived at his office. No return label. Inside was an old audio cassette carefully wrapped in tissue paper, a sticky note attached, "You should hear her, not just quote her." Curious, Darren found an old tape player in the basement of the Foundation's building and inserted the cassette. The tape crackled. Then came a voice. His mother's, younger, more unsure than the woman the world had met. A private recording, likely forgotten. "I don't know if anyone will ever care," she said. "But I want to leave something behind that matters, even if it's just for my son." Darren sat frozen, the air thick. "I want him to know that walking blind never meant walking weak. That silence can be dignity. That presence is louder than protest when the world's watching, then a pause. And if they break my cane one day, tell him not to break." The tape clicked, stopped. Darren closed his eyes, holding the recorder like it was her hand. Outside the window, a breeze moved gently through the city trees. Across town, Eleanor sat at her old park bench. No reporters, no admirers. Just sunlight, wind, and the distant sound of children laughing. Her cane rested beside her, not taped anymore. She had a new one now, sleek, balanced, a gift from a student whose brother once feared walking past precinct doors. She stood slowly, using the cane not as a crutch, but as rhythm. She walked, and with each tap, click, click, clicked on, the sound echoed louder than sirens. She passed a mural of herself, forgotten, faded, but she didn't stop to look. Legacy wasn't made in murals. It was made in classrooms, courtrooms, sidewalks, and kitchen tables. A jogger passed and nodded respectfully. She nodded back. Near the library, a group of kids played with chalk. One had drawn a heart. Inside it, 2 words, for Eleanor. She kept walking. When she reached her building, the doorman opened the door before she asked. "Ms. Williams," he said with a smile. "Back from your victory lap?" She gave a soft laugh. "Just stretching my legs." In the elevator, she faced forward. No reflection to greet her, just her own thoughts. She stepped into her apartment, watered the plant, brewed tea, then sat at her table and opened a letter from a young girl in Mississippi. "My school has a class named after you. I didn't know who you were, so I Googled you. Now I want to be like you. Is it okay if I do that?" Eleanor picked up a pen and wrote back. "Of course, but don't be like me. Be better." She folded the letter, sealed it, and placed her cane by the door. Tomorrow she'd walk again, and the world would keep hearing her even when she said nothing.